Today begins our lesson on ecology. We're going to begin by discussing what ecology is. Please keep in mind there is a difference between ecology and environmental science. While there are similarities, ecology is different. Ecology is the scientific study of how organisms interact with their environments. The scientists who study ecology are called ecologists. Ecologists collect qualitative data through making observations about the organisms and quantitative data by taking measurements, like measuring the temperature or the number of organisms in an area. You need to understand that ecologists are limited by the things that they do because when they do experiments and things like that, it cannot harm the ecosystems. So they do spend a lot of time observing. Ecology is a unique science in that it is multidisciplinary, meaning that it is very closely linked to other sciences like biology and chemistry and geology. Some of the things that need to be taken into account with ecology are biotic and abiotic factors. If you think about your root words, bio means life. So a biotic factor refers to anything that is living in an environment. So this could be the plants, the bacteria, and any of the animals. Abiotic factors refer to non-living things in an environment. A means not, bio means life. So abiotic factors are the non-living things in an environment or ecosystem. These would be things like the pH, the water, the temperature, the soil. When we talk about science, we've talked in the past how there are levels of organization. Ecology is no different. When we talked about the chemistry of life, we talked about starting with subatomic particles, and subatomic particles come together to make atoms. And atoms make molecules, and molecules make cell organelles. Cell organelles make cells. Cells come together and make tissue. A bunch of like tissues come together and make organs. A bunch of organs come together and make organ systems. And organ systems come together to make organisms. And that is where the levels in ecology pick up. They pick up with the organism or the individual. Then we talk about populations. Populations are groups of one species of organisms in one place at one time. So this would be all of the deer living in New Kensington at one time. Communities are interacting populations. So these are multiple different species in the same place at the same time and interacting. So maybe that would be the grass and the deer and the turkey and the robins making up the community in New Kensington. An ecosystem are the biotic and the abiotic factors in a certain area. So now this includes the non-living things like the temperature, the water, those things. Biomes are all of the ecosystems of the world. A biome is defined by a specific climate. Examples of biomes are like the tropical rainforest, the savanna, deserts, tundra. All of your biomes come together to make the biosphere. And the biosphere is the portion of Earth where life is found. And this goes from the bottom of the ocean to high up into the atmosphere. Two important vocab words to make sure you know for this unit are niche. A niche is the role that an organism plays within a community. A Species niche encompasses both the physical and the environmental conditions that it requires, and then how it interacts with other species, like competing with other species for different resources or having a predator-prey type of relationship. The other vocab word that's very important for you to know and understand is habitat. Habitat is basically like an organism's home address. This is where it lives. Keep in mind that habitats can be shared between species. So, how do organisms find their niche? A fundamental niche is a role that an organism can occupy without competition. Remember, competition is where two species are trying to use the same resource at the same time. Your resources could be things like mates, water, shelter, those types of things. A realized niche is a smaller niche than an organism occupies because of competition. Tolerance is the ability of an organism to survive in changing conditions, such as temperature. Certain organisms can only survive in certain types of habitats or environments. They have what is called a zone of tolerance or a range of tolerance where they can only survive in certain specific conditions. Specialists are organisms that have a limited tolerance to those changes in their environment. So maybe it is a fish that can only withstand certain pH changes in the water that they live in, or they can only withstand so much cold in the temperature change. Generalists are organisms that adapt more easily to the changes in their environment, and they have a larger range of tolerance. So they're able to tolerate more severe changes, like a greater temperature change in their environment. To summarize our ecology section, ecology is the study of how organisms interact with their environments. You need to remember that this includes both abiotic and biotic factors, so that are the living and the non-living things and how organisms interact with each other. That is what ecology is all about. We're going to talk about the spheres or the layers of the Earth now. There are 4 spheres of Earth. They interact with each other. The 4 spheres are the litho or geosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the biosphere. The litho or geosphere is the ground. The hydrosphere, if we break that down, hydro means water. So the hydrosphere is all of the water on Earth. The cryosphere is the part of the hydrosphere that is frozen, so the ice. The atmosphere is the air. And the biosphere is anywhere where we find life. These words are all coming from our Greek roots. So if you remember our root words, this will help you to figure out and remember what some of these mean. Let's begin by talking about the geosphere. The geosphere is made up of the land, the soil, the rocks, the minerals. It also includes our layers that take us down into the Earth's interior, like the core and the mantle. So it's all the layers of the Earth. So it would be the crust, the mantle, and the core. The hydrosphere is going to be where the water is. This does include the water that is underground. Most of your water that you use, your fresh water that you use, is underground water. And the hydrosphere does include that along with all of the surface water. It also includes the water that is in the air, the water vapor that forms your clouds and then will eventually come down as precipitation. The hydrosphere has a subcategory, which is the cryosphere, and that is the portion of the hydrosphere which is frozen. This is made up primarily of the glaciers and the sea ice, and these are something that is closely monitored for data about climate change. The atmosphere is the gases that surround the Earth. There are also layers to your atmosphere. Most of your atmosphere is made up of nitrogen and oxygen. The biosphere is the portion of Earth where life is found, so it includes the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, because you can find life in that entire section. So anywhere that life is found is part of the biosphere. It extends up into the atmosphere and down into the hydrosphere. It is important to keep in mind that these spheres interact. Like I said, the biosphere encompasses those, but the hydrosphere often will have water condense and fall down onto the geosphere or lithosphere in the form of precipitation. You have animals like humans who give off CO2. They put that CO2 into the atmosphere. So these spheres are constantly interacting. In summary, the 4 portions of the Earth are grouped by geosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere, and biosphere, and all of these spheres constantly interact. Feeding relationships. So one of the biggest things that we need to concentrate on in ecology is how organisms obtain their energy. Remember, this is one of our characteristics of life, that living things require energy. And in order to get their energy, organisms obtain their energy in different ways. Organisms that can make their own energy directly from the sun or chemical compounds are called autotrophs, or producers. Organisms that have to consume or eat something are called heterotrophs, or consumers. So they are dependent on autotrophs for their energy. We have subcategories of heterotrophs that we can discuss, like herbivores, which eat only plants, carnivores that eat only meat, and omnivores that eat both plants and meat. Those are subcategories of consumers based on how they obtain their energies. We also have 2 other classifications that we can discuss when discussing heterotrophs, and those are scavengers, and those are organisms that eat things that have already died. They, along with decomposers, which are organisms that break down dead and decaying matters into simpler molecules so that they can be recycled back through the environment, are very important in our ecosystems to keep the Earth from being covered in dead and decaying things. So how do we show our feeding relationships? Feeding relationships in ecology are illustrated using food chains. Your food chains show the flow of energy through an ecosystem. They show who eats who, where the energy comes from. Your arrows show the transfer of energy. Remember that your arrows always go with the flow. So in this diagram, the energy goes from the autotroph, which is your berry plant there, to the rabbit, and then it goes from the rabbit into the wolf. A food web shows one flow of energy. A food chain A food chain shows one flow of energy. A food web shows multiple flows of energy. A food web is more realistic than a food chain because in our ecosystems, we will have multiple feeding patterns going on. In a food web, we can show organisms eating more than one type of food. With your food webs, often things are a little bit more complex. There are things where it is overlapping. In our food webs, we can also factor in things like scavengers and decomposers. Remember, no matter what we're talking about, whether it's a food chain or a food web, the ultimate source of energy is the sun. Ultimately, every living thing gets its energy directly or indirectly from the sun. Plants get their energy directly from the sun, but even you get energy from the sun, you just get it indirectly. You get your energy from the sun by eating plants that got their energy from the sun, or animals that ate plants that got their energy from the sun. To wrap that up, important words that you need to remember are autotroph, heterotroph, scavengers, and decomposers. Remember, autotrophs are organisms that are able to make their own energy. Heterotrophs, or consumers, have to eat in order to get their energy. Food chains show the relationship of feedings in an ecosystem, but it is the one flow of energy in an ecosystem. Food webs show multiple feeding patterns and multiple flows of energy through an ecosystem. Remember that food chains can be no longer than 4 to 5 long, because after that there is not enough energy available for those top predators. So food chains do not go on indefinitely. They stop after 4 to 5 organisms. Organism relationships. Food chains and food webs are not the only things that we can use in ecology to show relationships. We can also use energy pyramids. We have, in an energy pyramid, we have trophic levels, and that is the level at which an organism is located on your energy pyramid. Same term also applies to the space that they occupy in a food chain or food web. At the start of your food chains and food webs are always your producers. Those are at the base of your energy pyramids. Your top predators, your apex predators, or your tertiary consumers are at the top of your energy pyramids. When you look at one of our biological pyramids, there is always more at the bottom and less at the top, because as you get to the top, you have less and less energy available. There are different types of biological pyramids. There are ones for biomass, energy, and numbers, but they all share things in common. There's always greater at the bottom, less at the top. There's always more energy available at the bottom and less at the top. So when we look at our energy pyramids, we do need to remember some things. And one of the rules that we need to remember is something that we started to talk about in our chemistry unit. And one of the things we need to keep in mind is that first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy is transferred from one organism to another. But what we do need to remember is that some energy is lost through heat and things like that at each level. So there is only 10% of the energy available to transfer to the next level. The rest is used by the organism. It stays in the undigested food, which gets passed, or it is given off as heat. So as you go up, there is less and less energy available at each level. Other important concepts that we need to talk about relationship-wise in ecology are things called symbiotic relationships. Symbiotic relationships are where two species are found living in close contact for most or all of their lives, and they form some type of relationship. There are three types of symbiotic relationships that we will talk about: commensalism, mutualism, and parasitism. The key is to whether organisms are helped, harmed, or neither, to determine which type of symbiotic relationship you have. The first type of symbiotic relationship that we're going to talk about is mutualism. Mutualism is a relationship between two organisms where both are benefiting. If you've ever heard the phrase, the feeling is mutual, when you hear someone say the feeling is mutual, it means you both feel the same way. So in this case, mutual means it's the same and they are both benefiting. An example of this would be a clownfish and a sea anemone. Think about Nemo. In Finding Nemo, he lived in that sea anemone. The way the clownfish is benefited is because it has a shelter, it has a place to live, it gets protection because of the anemone having these little stinging cells that hurt other fish. And the anemone is benefited because of the nutrients and that it gets from the clownfish's waste and how it scares off some of the predators. Commensalism is where one organism is benefited and the other is not benefited or harmed. It's just truly unaffected. An animal like a tree frog using the plants for protection with camouflage in that where it blends in. The plant isn't benefited or harmed in any way, but the tree frog gets camouflage and it has its home. Parasitism is where one organism is helped while the other is harmed. Think things like fleas, ticks, leeches. Those are parasites, tapeworms. They take things from their host and the host is harmed. You could also classify predation as something along these lines, and that's where one organism is hunted and the prey is the food source. So the predators benefit and the prey is harmed. To summarize things up, you need to know what your biological pyramids are. There are the three biological pyramids: energy, biomass, and numbers. There is always less energy available at the top than the bottom because of it being used at each step and some of it being lost through heat. You also need to remember what a symbiotic relationship is, and that is going to be a relationship between two species where the organisms benefit in some way, at least one.